Hey, yo, churchies. Welcome back to my first lesson, the first chapter of the American Methodism class. So, if you missed the last one, it was talking about the top 10 uh, things that I learned from the first three chapters of the book. And so, when we talk about how that relates to then and today, this is how I responded to the question: what issues from the era of the origins of the United Methodist Church are still a concern today? Okay. What issues from the origins of the United Methodist Church are still a concern today? I think one of the issues we can continue to see today are they contend with during the foundations of the church was the role that the government played in the allegiances of the people with the conflicts of the revolution. I had always just assumed that the majority of the nation was in line with the idea of freeing themselves from English control. That freedom was a universal belief that everyone felt that America deserved the right to govern itself independently from another authority. But then you begin to think about the relationship, right, that those early preachers, the Wesleys and the others, had with the Church of England and with England itself. To revolt against England was to revolt against the church and to revolt against the desire for unity that they had worked so hard to establish up to that point. Some were punished, some fled to Canada, and others were all for the revolution and the idea that freedom should be achieved. What is the role of the pastor in the midst of revolution? Should they preach hope and unity in the face of opposition? Or should they join the fight for freedom? Should they ignore it and go on as Sunday as usual? I think about that in today's hostile climate where everybody has an opinion and everybody has chosen a color, red, blue, whatever, to represent. I would hope that it is not a preacher's main desire to push a political agenda or to sway individuals to a particular political belief. But then what is the position that we should affirm, right? When it feels like all sides are corrupt, when it appears that all sides are working for their own glorification, then where do we see our part in that? For instance, you think about the race issue and how at first the idea of freedom should extend to everyone, but when others opposed that, they quieted their voices and allowed slavery to continue. I would like to think that we should not so easily quiet our voices, but the system has muddied the waters that there is no clear path to the right choice. How do we uphold the will of God while speaking out about the inhumanity of man to those less than themselves? Or is that simply not our job? We should just stay in our lane. I think that preaching in the time of revolution is always going to be a difficult assignment, but we should be brave enough to stand for those that cannot speak for themselves as they did in their time. So shall we in ours, I hope. Marion responded, Seth, you raised an important issue. 1 Corinthians 13:12 is a comfort to me. We don't know everything. Addiction used to be thought of as a matter of will. Now with science, we know that the brain has changed and that addiction is much more complicated. We need to be as clear as possible about God's love for all, God's power to bring life from death, the new life possible through Jesus Christ. Methodists from the beginning were involved with social issues and working to make community, state, nation, world better for all. You will learn how the South changed to a personal salvation alone, and the church was to have no political voice. Bascom responded, Seth, I believe that your discussion and your questions about what is our job and what is our role have always, as history reminds us, been important. It is especially difficult when the battle lines are drawn and each side uses God and religion to support their beliefs and ideologies. I have to confess that I have been guilty of partisan religion, and it's especially difficult for me when I see religion used to discriminate against people of color or people with different sexual orientations. I would like to think that God freely gives his love to everyone, and that my calling is to simply proclaim the good news whenever I have the opportunity. Like you, I believe that God calls us to stand for those who cannot speak or act for themselves. One of my favorite passages is Matthew 25:31 through 46. I believe this passage calls us to service in a simple and dramatic way. I also believe that history is very important for reminding us of where we have been and what we are called to do in the name of Christ. So that was the wrap up and summary of chapter 1. And I will let you know, well, chapter 1 through 3. And next week will be the next chapter. So till then, thanks. And that's history.